Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is guaranteed to be Thursday by the time anyone sees this, but yesterday it was time for me to do a viewer track review video. And so, here it is, still basically Wednesday for maybe a good third of the planet, but yikes, get on it, why don't I? Anywho, coming up next is Dark Matter by Drayx. I feel like I've seen this name before and had a similarly hard time pronouncing it. Yeah, I said coming up next, even though that wasn't anything that happened yet. Anyway, we're gonna do this though, and let's see what this is gonna be about. Yeah, zoom in, why don't we? Start at the beginning, why don't we? Do. Well, that was just hardcore mega dope. Damn. That was so many. That gave me so very many specific feels. Like, I'm trying to remember this one track from Newgrounds from so long ago that this kind of reminds me of, and I honestly can't believe that I can't remember the name of that track because I was obsessed with it for a while. It was for a while for me personally, the shining golden example of awesome drum and bass sound design, and I genuinely can't remember what it was called, but it had a really dope kind of like tone that was somewhat similar to some of the stuff that happens in here, and it's pretty similar when it's passed out like this, and it reminds me a lot of it. Plus it's drum and bass, so it's, you know, it happens. I like this beat a lot. I like the kind of focus on that. Like that's all very. I like. It's not very common. I dig it. It's very Teddy Killer's vibe. Also, is the other specific feeling I was getting on the rest of this, with the focus on just how hard the hit is, but also the real kind of the keeping the background in the background. What I think is cool about this track is that it has 3 distinct layers of air. There's the kick and the snare that doesn't have too much. It's not like they have none. There's definitely some, but it's not a lot. And they're in front, and that's just what they do. And then behind that, there's the bass, which also has some amount of air, but not a tremendous amount. You can hear it kind of echoing about, and that's cool. And then there's the background stuff. There's like the brass instruments and the pings and the dings and all that junk going on in the background. These elements have even bigger air. And what's like mixing, and when you're putting a bunch of stuff together, it's all about trying to make the human brain understand that there are different things happening. Because technically speaking, in the most literal sense, there is not a bunch of things happening. There is one thing happening. It's the signal. It is going up and down, and it is one thing. In this case, it's actually 2 things because it's stereo. But because of that extra dimension of stereo, we can now make it appear very separated in our heads because we're hearing it. There's these plateaus of level in various ways. And for the most part, for mixing, that's a kind of a spectral case where you're kind of like, there's power here, there's power here, filter this, less power, But now in this way, there's distinct enough air like presence. Like the kick and the snare have distinctly enough, not as much as the bass, which is distinctly as much, not as not as much as the background stuff. And that makes it like, it actually gives it all very deliberate separation. Of course, they are themselves all separated in things like frequency anyway, so that helps them keep them very far apart. This is a very surgically well done track also. For all these elements that are happening, it is pretty much exactly the way that it all needs to be. This extreme high presence that shows up on the main guy is a little bit weird, but I got used to it by the time it was done, so I guess it wasn't that bad. It's not new. I mean, you don't see, this is an MP3, I think. You don't see that hardcore clipping happening too much, which is saying something, because normally when someone has too much of a like top end on their thing, this kind of thing is devastating. But this isn't devastating. It's just a taste. It might actually be the right amount of that stuff for the first time ever. Maybe that's why I don't know how to describe it so much. Like, because it's not, you can tell it's not really overdoing it. It's not being as loud as the bass, which sometimes happens in some cases. Anyway, good job with that track. Moving on, we have Naero, Naero resolution. Nice. All right. Let's see what this is like. I forget how much fun I have doing these. That was cool. That was a good touch. You know, something like, let's actually talk about that first. This is actually one of the harder things about making a big old thing like this, is when you end it and all your bits take 16 years to end. And the proper thing to do, you know, is too long. You know that it doesn't matter that it's a short one will feel like it's not long enough. The full length version will bore anyone. There's no escaping it. If you know that about it, doing something like this, like having an actually conclusive ending, is the smart call. It's just normally hard to do that. And I liked how this happened. This was an excellent choice to end this business. So, this track is awesome. This was entirely too long. It was really cool. Like, I after this whole first half happened, I was like blown apart. I'm like, holy crap, this is beautiful. This beat is dope. Plus, you're pretty much exemplifying everything I said about the air plateaus from the previous look. And plus, I get to talk about neat stuff like how you can visibly see the difference in the air, about how like this constant plateau of a thing in the background lets you see what's on top of it with almost perfect clarity. How cool is that? And but then like, by the time I got around here, I had to ask myself if I accidentally skipped back a minute. Like, I thought I looped it by accident. Like, that's what happened. It's cool. Doesn't need to be that long. Like, I could see where something like that, right? That seems about right. But basically that, right? You do this build up thing you're doing and do the second part. Although, so the choice to make a different kit is cool, but it has to meet or exceed original expectations, you know? And if it goes in a different direction, it can't just be doing the same thing worse, you know? It has to be doing something else, something that perhaps is whatever group of sounds you choose is the thing that thing can do, that the other one would only do worse if it were to do that particular groove. Just to give a quick example of something that could work in an environment like this, because this beat, this is so on. But now we have this expectation of that particular kind of like transient based hits that are on and like come through and don't warble too much and don't, you know, do that kind of deal. And then so this beat that comes up, if that were actually the beat that were here and the same beat here, I would have less of a problem with it. I would probably say something about how it didn't hit hard enough, but I wouldn't know precisely how much harder it could have hit if I had this example that showed me that. But if we turn to this beat, my suggestion is that like you do something that other one wasn't, and what that one could not be because it is so hard is full of ghost notes and nuance. So doing like a full-on break with like a drum kit that sounded kind of realistic, like that's something that's with a sensitivity that could match the content, and could be different enough and to justify being that far different in content. That's just one method of doing it. Other way of doing it would be to have not switched the kits up so much. Still though, absolute credit for creativity here. Also on the main bass, dope stuff. Just so freaking cool. Like, good God. The only, like, the nitpick I have is you did a particular thing a little too particularly well. The thing you did was you maintained phase coherence in the bite of your source that you were filtering well enough that the saw wave toothiness is present too strongly. Like you can see it. You can see it happening. Like it's either a saw wave you layered, which good job, that did the job, or it's part like the process of your sound was well enough that it preserved it above it. Like good either way. You did it. You did the layering, and it sounds like the job that you wanted to do. It's just that you did it too well, and now it makes the song strangely top heavy, despite really not being top heavy. Like you can see plainly that there is not a power disparity that's terrible. And yet, what's with that scratchy vibe, right? What's with it? What is that? And this is what we're experiencing right now is high frequency mud, and it's kind of amazing. It's not. So here's a question. Like regular mud, right? If this were to be like maximum level and 0 dB up and squashed up, and basically not treated as well as it is in this track, this frequency section right here would be considered what we think of as mud. The reason why, though, is because the action that's happening here, not being harmonic, isn't really the thing we're paying attention to. It's all these holes in between that are showing up, because they're the result of the phase cancellation. The math is happening, and it's concluding that there is level up and down and whatnot, and this is the result that we're seeing. If these areas of negativity show up fast enough, they get close to being a tone, but not close enough, and not regular enough to be a tone either. But we can still hear it. We can start to hear it and feel it because it's crossing that range between being LFO motion and audio rate motion. LFO standing for low frequency oscillation, which is specifically slow enough that even if it is mathematically a tone, you can only hear it as individual motion. And when you do things like chords, this is why you can't really make chords out of a low register of a piano. Like you can do that, you can play low enough levels, but if you really hear it, it's because the phase cancellation between the notes that is what makes a chord is now so low that it's not a note anymore or harmonic in our ears because it sounds like motion. Now, you might think, well, okay, that's cool about all that, and I get it, but you said high frequency, and we're talking about saw wave stuff. What? And as it turns out, this property that we're describing is something that's true from all frequencies, and not just that it crosses the threshold of audio rate LFO, specifically that lower frequency presence is generated from high frequency phase cancellation. Damn it, yes, yay, good. That was a good sentence. I gotta remember that one for when I do lessons. I gotta record it. What did I just say? Low frequency presence is generated by high frequency phase cancellation. Yes, cool. So, like, this equates to saying, you know, you can jam a bunch of stuff together, and if it resonates in a certain way, that resonance will itself be a tone. And if you distort things, you can see it happen. Like the extra harmonics that show up that are lower is that. Like that's exactly what that stuff is. It's also why when you're a metal guitarist and you play a fourth based power chord instead of a 1-5-1, you play a 1-4-1. It sounds like you're playing a 1-5-1 and like a fifth lower than you're doing a fourth lower, a fifth lower, a fourth lower, a fifth lower, a fifth lower. Yeah. And it's a neat trick to take your like not very low tune guitar and make it kind of have a range that does sound kind of low. It's essentially kind of like doing a sub inversion via multiplication because of distortion. And in this sort of example, the way that all the stuff's lined up, it's giving us a top heavy presence that we actually can't see because it's not actually present in the source. It's present in how it all interacts at us. And it makes it so that like essentially we have the same result. You still gotta like low pass a bit on like that guy. Like the presence on the highs on that, like you can't even really see it. It doesn't seem like it would be that big a deal, but it still is. So I would recommend coming down on it a little bit. Because relative to everything else, like everything else is basically the perfect level. Loudness wise, and so now I'm mostly considering that thing's loudness relative to everything else, which is to say that it shouldn't need to be that loud. High frequency anything doesn't need to be that loud relative to itself, like fundamental. God, that was another good one, man. I hope I'm not garbling this up. Okay, up next, where is my downloads? Here comes AkZeNT with Marked Up. Yeah, this one's a WAV file. Let's see how we do in the beginning. Yeah, there we go. So this is a fine beat. I like the presence. I like the tone on the melodic content. It feels very like, I mean, this feels like a beat made for a vocal, and I'm sure it'll be different with vocals, but this as a thing, beat alone, could be a beat alone. It's honestly fine. I only think that just because you had your name at the beginning and end there, which that's just a thing that beat makers who expect to have vocals do. However, it gets people conscious of their brand. I was going to say a thing. Oh yeah, so here's an example of when it looks a little bit less plateauy, right? So this is it's only really kind of top heavy just because this is everything heavy. This is like everything has got as much presence as everything else, and it's difficult to differentiate stuff like relative to the previous two tracks. So essentially, I'm saying this doesn't have very great dynamic range, and now like that would seem counterintuitive as a critique from to come from me. That's how I'm gonna have words. What I'm saying is like that's usually like the opposite. Like I don't seem to care that much about like conserving dynamic range, right? But ultimately, we want to conserve the illusion of it. The dynamic range has certain expectations, like things that we like about it aren't so much that it just is it. It's just that it's the best way to get the certain things that we like about it. Things like things sounding bigger than other things, things having impact, things being punchy. These are, if we had no ceiling on making a track as loud as we wanted to make it, you could just pick a medium and just get increasingly louder and louder on elements. Like people do on live shows, if you didn't know that. Like when bands play, when DJs play, it doesn't matter. If there's an opener and a headliner, the opener will begin at a certain level, and the front of house people will just crank it up as over time until the last act is like the biggest, loudest bunch. It's a bit like they want to make the headliner look good, sure, but it's also just to keep pace with listeners having gotten used to things, because that's just everything is relative, right? So when I'm talking about does that kind of problems with dynamic range, like it's a question of how many ways can you make one thing different from another thing. And what we were talking about in the previous tracks was the sensation of utilizing the air plateaus as another way of making things different from each other. And this track has air. Like even when there's other things happening, everything appears basically on the same plane. That's sort of the difference. It not so much that there's a lot of motion and dynamic range or a lot of room for there to be different planes. I'm sure. Well, this track seems a lot more squash actually, but the previous tracks also had a pretty decent amount of squish to them, and it's because while it's true that it added up to the sausage, spectrally speaking, things were still pretty dynamic, and that's pretty much how I tend to go about things. And the reason why you want dynamics at all in this context, even though we're going to squash it all, but is because we want to be able to detect different things. We want things to feel like they are different when they play on each other. And it's true that we can just make sounds different, but this is a question about how many ways can you make a thing different? You can have different notes, you can have different tones. So it's basically different spectral stuff, right? But eventually you put on enough things that happen in the same place. What do you just not enough room, notes or spectrum wise, but there could be more room in other ways to define things, like by their air or by their impact or by, like, that's part of the reasons why we even have drums or even can have drums. Like, has it felt weird to anyone else to refer to percussion as instruments? Not so much because it's a bit like referring to human beings as animals. Like, you technically knew that to be true, but you didn't really feel that way about it, did you? And why is that? And I think it has less to do with looking down on percussion than it is just assuming its presence and being just like at minimum, along with all this other stuff that we're going to do, we're also going to have this entire other percussive universe. Pardon my breath. Anyway, the percussive universe thing is basically a whole depth of area of stuff that's not doing what all the other melodic stuff is doing, so that it can enhance it by being a layer of things that's different. And a lot of the coolness in tracks is clever interaction with these things that makes them feel like they're all related and together while being different, right? But I mean, we refer to compressors as things like the glue compressor with the explicit intention of marrying things together and sound in such a way without necessarily having to be so clever. And I'm definitely not knocking that, by the way. whatever you do that makes it work is fine. And I'm mostly bringing all that up of stuff just to get across the point of like how you would solve this as a thing. It's not even so much about doing too much. Like these kick and the snare also were a bit buried by how not much louder they are than everything else. Yeah, see, let's breathe air. This sub, like, look at this guy. It's huge and it's baller. It sounds awesome, but it's also as powerful as everything else. And I mean, a snare doesn't need to have power. Like hip hop tracks, if this is meant to be one, don't necessarily need to have kicks for snares. But the idea is that some amount of impact needs to be on the thing to separate them from being the kick and the sub. Like they feel a little too together. When you probably, I mean, you want them to feel related, but not like married. I think maybe depends on your goals, as per usual. All right. Good job, AkZeNT. Moving on, we have Swrdfish with Papercut. Yeah. See, look, this one has visibly kind of some negative space involved, but still looks pretty beefy. Not necessarily a pro or con or for or against either method. Mostly just describing these terms when people say things, when they just talk about this. Yeah, I try to say describe and I think discuss and talk at the same time. So I just said discut. Nope, didn't say that either. Okay, I'm just going to let a song play in a minute here we go. And then it ended. Okay. So I was almost fine with this song when we were doing this bit. Like I got kind of confused by the disparity of loudness here, but then it made sense. And then if it had ended here, other than saying it should be longer, what I would have said is that this was utterly serviceable, and that the only thing that weirded me out is that the presence on this bass is clearly bigger than the kick. It just feels bigger than the kick. Really shouldn't. And but the kick is fine, the side chaining is fine, and this track would be fine. I would say there could be a better snare, but it's fine. It's all fine. Until this part happened. I appreciate the effort of there being a B part, but this was too much of that for too long for how little of this there was, and like was mostly okay with it here because it was part of the build up, like for that whole length, and that was it. Like, it's a trend. I don't really think I guess it's not a trend. I guess it's a technique to have a kind of busted up B kit in the beginning, where it's like you have your main beat going on, and then you have a kind of like a kit you have going on that like sounds busted or is too short. It's essentially not powerful stuff. Usually light, usually high pass, not the right kind of junk, right? And I guess that's kind of what's happening here as well. But it made sense in the beginning to be that way because it was the beginning. And then after this happened, much like the other track about it being different the second time and being weird because you already had the first time, this isn't just happening again. It's happening in a universe where not only where it already happened, but where this happened. So that changes sort of the requirements for it. So kick is there and everything in here, a massive difference to kind of bring it together. If you fix that up enough, I think this track would be pretty well fine. It'd be weird, I guess, for this bit, but it's still kind of rad. See, this part's also fine. Like, this part also, I'd be like, the kick is a little bit weird being not that loud, but this also isn't that much louder than the kick. And it's bassy, so it, like, feels relevant that it's like that. Unlike this guy, which was, like, way more than it in total. But good job otherwise. Moving on, we have PyrateGFX with Ready Steady. Harkening to somewhat Oakenfold. Okay, start at the beginning, why don't we? Cool beans. And here we go with this. Wow. Okay, well, as far as reactions from me go, if the weirder you make a thing, the more likely I am to be like, yay, good, A+. Because, by what standard do I hold a thing like this? When I go off the beaten path, what tends to happen is that I'll work on what I'm working on for a while, and then listen to the thing that inspired me to do the weird thing that I'm doing for a while. Which will be like some song from a movie or a game or from a really old album or whatever that isn't mixed like anything from this time period, right? And then I'll like listen to something from some artist that I actually like, and then I'll be reminded of like the kind of impact and structure and presence that modern stuff has, and I'll go listen to my thing again and be like, ugh, this kind of sounds like what would happen if I actually fixed up a thing like something like those and actually made it on par with a modern experience, despite not necessarily being a modern experience, but absolutely because of that being a modern experience. I don't even know how hard the compression should be on something like this. Like I tend to want to have, impacts on stuff, but I don't know. I don't more, than this. For this anyway. This kind of reminds me a bit of the Akira soundtrack, and other such similar things. So that's probably good. This is great. Good job. I don't know a whole lot else to say about it. Other than strangely, for being all of this, it doesn't have a hell of a lot of dynamic range, and it totally could, because what is it competing against, right? But I don't necessarily think you got a problem separating some things, because all the things are different from each other. Like, this person asked themselves, how many ways can I make things different from each other, and answered a few of them. So good job there. Coming up on next, we have ZetaSphere with something new, sang to the Pokemon theme, because I just got showed Pokemon Rusty, and that stuff was funny. Okay, let's see what this is like. There was a comment from this individual on Discord that said something to the effect that they are aware of mixing or the compression, something like that. Let's find out, though. did this on purpose, didn't you? You watery person, you. Gosh, I just, I was like, I was feeling weird about this whole thing, and I was trying to figure out why. And like, kudos for two reasons. One, I did not notice that this stuff was in here until you separated it and showed them off individually. Didn't even get a glimpse, because it was embedded in here well enough that I just, when they're there, I didn't get it. Just didn't. And kudos too, because it was still doing the job. And by the job, I mean making me feel a little ill. Like making me kind of like, what's happening here? And like I was starting to talk to myself about being like, where's the high frequency stuff? Like I'm getting a lot of lows, mids, and kind of like mostly that empty kind of enter here. I was mostly talking about how you know something, I see this here. I probably missed it because it was in this modulation well enough that it actually sounded pretty cool. Like as an individual element, these things aren't that watery. Watery. They're not that watery, and it's just that when they're combined with the rest of the stuff, I knew it would happen too. Like I was seeing this here, and I was just like, oh no, and like every time, every new one had a little slightly different kind of result on it, and like they weren't that bad, they weren't that watery, and a couple of them got real, and then they got more, and then the beat was just like, okay, full force, geez, wow, good job on the water. So it isn't so much that you did utilize the plateaus of air and levels, it's that you just have so much stuff. So you have this issue of the kick and thing still not being far enough away from everything else to feel powerful enough. Breathing. I need like a Darth Vader mask. Anyway, to that end, saying things about kicks and snares. Yeah, the snare also didn't have the punch. They needed to punch through all the stuff. There's so many things to punch through. There's so much punching to do. So the thing has to punch. Like for as much punching as there is, there's more punch to do. That's not as elegant a thing as the other two things I said earlier that I can't remember that I'm glad I recorded. But that's still a thing to say. As much things as there are to punch is as much punch as there is to do. Yeah. Someone write that down so I can copy and put it on a t-shirt. Anyway, still though, really good track, like musically excellent. And this stuff for being airy and weird and out there was not too long. It didn't take too long to get through here. It took a little long to get through this, but that's fine. It's an outro. Like every one of these was expertly lengthed. And like did the job of making this song be like structurally proficient in such a way that like as much as what was happening here happening the same way mostly at the same time wasn't that bad. It was fine, and like good music as well. So good job, very good job there. And the compression wasn't that bad, although like I could say it could be harder because everything can be harder, but I think a lot of it would sound less squishy if there was more high frequency content masking. And like also they were so loud, you could hear them so well through the beat, because like you really well, you know, panned and mid-side some stuff, I hope, to do that, and like it did a good job. It's just that I hate it so much. It's not your fault. It's a very personal opinion. It's very much a me problem, and it is extremely clear to tell that I am in a minority about not liking this particular texture. But I can tell when you do it well, and it's pretty easy to tell because it's like the opposite of liking it. If it like makes me mad, you did it right. So good the hell job. Good the hell job, sir. Or madam. Unsure. Whatever. Individual. Good track. Yes. Cool. All right. If y'all would like to have one of your tracks presented in one of these videos, feel free to hop on over to the Discord channel, wherein there is a channel for you to submit your tracks. There's a bunch of rules and stuff that you really should follow because it helps them do things like say your name and the track name and that kind of thing. And there's mods to help you out. They're pretty great. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day. Whew, breathing. I am getting old.